The air was thick with the residue of terror, a tangible miasma that pricked at Anya Mbeki's skin, but it was the glowing digital sign, Power 2, flickering above the crimson slurry that truly froze the blood in her veins. This wasn't a metaphor for corporate greed. This was a timer for their lives. Could they escape the field before the power hit zero? Elias Thorne, a man whose existence had been curated by generations of unearned privilege, had spent his last sane moments sneering about a land deal that would have left dozens of families homeless. The sneer, however, had been brutally arrested mid-contemptuous curl. 1 second, he was announcing his philanthropic displacement to a ballroom full of equally vapid socialites, and the next, the world had become a sickening kaleidoscope of heat, the metallic stench of iron, and the terrifying soft squelch of something viscous beneath his handcrafted Italian leather shoes. The transition had been less a blackout and more a violent, hyperreal dissolve, as if reality itself had been a poorly rendered projection that simply gave way to the true, horrifying canvas beneath. When his vision cleared, the marble floor of the Washington, D.C. gala was gone. The tinkling champagne flutes and the sycophantic murmur of the crowd had been replaced by a suffocating heat that baked the very air, and the deep, unsettling quiet of a landscape utterly alien. He was standing, or rather sinking slightly, in the gore-field. It defied easy classification. It wasn't simple mud, though it had the viscosity of thick, wet earth. It wasn't precisely blood, though its color was the deep, unsettling crimson of a fresh, massive wound. It was a slurry, thick and coalescing, that clung to his bespoke trousers and threatened to suction the shoes right off his feet. It was a landscape of coagulated terror, punctuated by wickedly sharp black obelisks that jutted up like the fangs of some subterranean leviathan, the Thorns. Elias gasped, a high-pitched sound of pure, unadulterated shock that was wholly unworthy of the man who saw himself as a titan of industry. It was the sound of a protected animal yanked violently from its enclosure. He stumbled, his ingrained sense of entitlement momentarily overridden by the raw, primal urge to survive, and in a move of pure, desperate instinct, he clutched the nearest solid object, which happened to be Anya Mbeki's arm. His grip was the frantic, desperate vice of a drowning man mistaking a seagull for a life raft. What is this? Is this performance art? Unacceptable. I'll sue the Foundation. His voice, usually a booming instrument of boardroom tyranny, was now just a ragged whisper laced with a frantic edge. He looked around wildly, searching for an exit sign, a waiter, a lawyer. Anything that could restore the comfortable transactional reality he had always known. The thought that his trust fund could not buy his way out of this immediately rendered the situation unacceptable in his mind. Anya Mbeki, however, did not flinch. She slapped his hand away with a sharp, controlled motion. Anya was a woman accustomed to fighting uphill battles. Battles against city council apathy, against systemic prejudice, and most recently, against Thorne-sized developers intent on swallowing up the community center she had poured her heart, soul, and considerable architectural genius into. To her, Elias was not a man. He was a walking, talking, silk tie-wearing metaphor for everything wrong with the world, a symbol of careless destruction. Her mind, honed by years of mapping complex structural systems and anticipating failures, was already moving past the shock. Where Elias saw chaos and a potential lawsuit, Anya saw a trap, a defined, if utterly insane, structure with rules she had not yet deciphered. The air itself felt dense, weighted down by a palpable miasma of residual fear and something else, something mechanical and cold. It's not art, Thorne. It's a trap. Look. Her voice was low and taut, channeling her own rising terror into the icy clarity of logic. She pointed with a hand that trembled only slightly to the glowing sign, hanging suspended and eerily still between two of the colossal black spikes. The digits were a stark, cold orange. Power 2. Below the number, an orange bar flickered, the visual representation of a rapidly diminishing resource. As if summoned by her observation, a detached metallic voice boomed across the hellscape. It possessed the chilling, utterly lacking in empathy cadence of an automated public service announcement, laced with a master's degree in satire. Welcome, contestants. Your power meter is your life force, your currency, and your timer. It drains slowly by existence. It drains rapidly by fear. Maintain your emotional fortitude, or be consumed by the thorns. Your objective is the nexus point. Achieve it or decay. The voice made their existential horror sound like a mundane, if slightly inconvenient, quarterly review. Elias's face, which had been set in the complacent mask of inherited entitlement for 42 years, crumpled. The raw, terrifying realization that his money could not insulate him from this reality hit him like a physical blow. Fear. My God, I'm terrified. What about my trust fund? Does this thing accept euros? No, wait. Don't tell me I have to earn power. His panic wasn't just a mental state. It was a quantifiable, destructive force. As his terror spiked, the digital drain on the meter accelerated visibly. The number 2 dimmed momentarily, a stark warning. Stop panicking, you overgrown toddler. Anya hissed, not out of malice, but pure strategic necessity. She felt the chilling tendrils of her own rising panic, the very fear that threatened to kill them, and ruthlessly crushed it, channeling the energy into analysis. The Thorns. They react to sound, maybe movement, and definitely your panic. We need to find the nexus point before we hit 0. And you need to control yourself. They began to move, a ridiculously mismatched pair of accidental companions. Elias, stumbling and flinching from every jutting black spike, was a beacon of panicked inefficiency. His finely tuned sense of superiority was completely useless here. Anya, however, moved with the measured, contained grace of a hunter, her focus absolute. She watched the spikes, the crimson slurry, and the power meter with the unwavering gaze of an engineer examining a stressed bridge. Their tense scramble led them into a small clearing, an island of slightly firmer ground within the gore-field. In the center stood the first ascension altar, a black obsidian pedestal topped with a small, humming crystal that pulsed with a faint, contained energy. Beneath it, carved into the obsidian, was a single stark inscription. The price of power is sacrifice. Ah, a puzzle. I know puzzles. Elias exclaimed, a flicker of his old, transactional composure returning with the sight of something that could be solved, perhaps even with a material object. His world had always operated on the principle of quid pro quo. You pay, you receive. I shall offer my vintage Rolex. It's an original, worth a small fortune. That's worth at least 10 points of power. He fumbled instinctively for the diamond-encrusted watch on his wrist. Anya shook her head, a sardonic, almost pitying smile twisting her lips, instantly suppressed. This isn't a pawn shop, Thorne. The game master isn't interested in your debt to society or your vintage accessories. The price is sacrifice. You think this is about money. She noticed a faint, shimmering, almost emotional outline around the pedestal, like a field waiting to be charged. The sacrifice required was clearly not material. Just as she was formulating a hypothesis, a massive, thorn-covered limb, looking terrifyingly like a diseased, overgrown root made of dark, hardened sinew, erupted from the crimson ground between them. It slammed into a nearby black spike with horrifying force, shattering it into a shower of crystal and dust. The sheer, shocking violence of the sound and impact sent a wave of fresh, paralyzing fear through Elias. He whimpered. The power 2 meter flickered violently, dropping toward a critical, unseen threshold. Anya's mind clicked into place. The limb, the fear, the draining power. The game was an inversion of their normal lives. Sacrifice wasn't money. It was emotional burden. To gain power, they had to shed the very things that defined and restrained them. Their inherent emotional weaknesses, their arrogance, their carefully constructed facades. Your arrogance, Thorne, Anya shouted, her voice cutting through the panic. It's not just annoying. It's suffocating this space. It's draining the power. Give me a genuine moment of humility, and maybe the crystal will activate. Stop being Elias Thorne, the CEO, and just be Elias, the terrified man. Humility. I invented humility. I have a whole foundation for it. I'm a philanthropist, he sputtered, desperately trying to cling to the familiar rhetoric of his previous life. But then he caught sight of the advancing, shuddering limb, which was now dragging itself menacingly toward him. Real, unadulterated fear, the kind that melts inherited pride and exposes the fragile core beneath, finally hit him. It was the fear of a life being erased without the comfort of his financial shield. He dropped to his knees in the chilling crimson sludge, heedless of his Seville rose suit. The act itself was a massive seismic shift in his persona. I am just Elias, he choked out, his voice stripped bare. His eyes met hers, and for the first time, he wasn't looking down at her, but at her. My money is a shield. I don't know how to do anything real. I'm completely useless here. I'm sorry, Anya. Truly. For trying to take your center. For everything. The crystal on the altar responded instantly. It flared with a strong, clean white light. A visible pulse of energy, like an electric current, shot from the crystal into the floating power meter. It ticked up from a draining critical point back to a solid, stable power 2, and the orange progress bar edged slightly forward. The massive, diseased limb retracted back into the gore-field with a wet, sucking sound. Climax 1. Success. See, Anya said, giving him a look that was a complex mix of disdain for his former self and relief for their present salvation. Your honesty is surprisingly powerful. You have something to offer after all. Now get up. We need to maintain this momentum, and that means you need to stay honest. As they navigated the labyrinthine landscape of sharp black thorns, their dynamic underwent a rapid, forced evolution. Anya was the pragmatic, clear-headed navigator, her architectural training giving her an uncanny ability to read the dangerous, unstable terrain. Elias, surprisingly, was becoming the nervous yet eager apprentice. The loss of his wealth, not just the money, but the security blanket it represented, had stripped him down. A raw, almost endearing vulnerability was exposed beneath the layers of entitlement. He was discovering that his mind, when divorced from his ledger, still possessed a certain, if oddly applied, analytical power. You know, this reminds me of a quarterly earnings report, Elias mused, trying to inject some familiar, comforting structure into the overwhelming chaos. He had to think in terms he understood. High burn rate, low liquidity. We achieved our first power revenue target, but we need a strong, repeatable revenue stream, Anya. We can't just rely on crisis-driven panic. This is not a NASDAQ filing, Thorne, she replied, her voice taut with concentration as she eyed a particularly dense thicket of thorns, but the corner of her lips twitched with a smile she immediately suppressed, a smile of grudging respect for his ability to function. It's a death trap. And my revenue stream is keeping your sarcasm from spiking the meter and giving us away to whatever created this. They worked their way past the thicket, their focus now a shared tangible thing. They were a fragile, forced partnership, each relying on the other's unique strength. Her ability to process threat with logic, his raw, if newly exposed, emotional depth. They moved toward a narrow gap between two colossal dripping spikes, a path that looked marginally safer. That was when they saw the second ascension altar. It was larger, more ornate, and humming with a more potent energy. Crucially, it was guarded by a pair of monstrous, hunched figures. They were made of the same matted crimson material as the field, punctuated by sharp white bone, and they stood motionless, their heads bowed as if in perpetual penance or predatory patience. The metallic voice returned, its tone of breezy cruelty intensified. Welcome back to the market, contestants. The second altar requires an offering of connection. A bond forged under duress is the most valuable currency. You may choose to break the bond by betraying your partner, or double the stake by making the connection real. The voice paused, the silence heavy with implied menace. Beware. The price of an insincere connection is the ultimate decay. Connection. Elias whispered, his eyes flicking from the grotesque bone-spiked guards to Anya. He had started this game seeing her as an obstacle, a distraction from his land acquisition. Now, terrifyingly, he saw her as the only thing separating him from the cold, inevitable end promised by the gore-field. He saw the fire of her intelligence, the steel of her resolve, and he understood, with a profound, terrifying clarity, that he was the weaker link. The monstrous guards began to shift, a grating sound of bone on bone. Anya's architectural mind immediately knew the rules of a sharp plot. Only one true path, only one solution that didn't end in death. The game wasn't asking for friendship or even temporary alliance. It was demanding a shared, tangible vulnerability, a complete rejection of their former antipathy. Elias, she said, her voice shaking slightly, the emotion she had been suppressing finally breaking through her architectural composure. The price was vulnerability. When I saw the papers filed to demolish my center, I didn't just feel anger. I thought about burning your yacht to the waterline. I hated you. You were everything I despise. She had to offer her truth, her darkest thought about him. He looked into her eyes, the terror in her gaze mirroring his own, but he saw something beyond the fear, the fierce protective love she had for her community. He saw the pain he had caused, not as a business expense, but as a human injury. He closed the remaining gap between them, not with a romantic gesture, but with a bracing, supportive hold, his hand on her shoulder. "Anya," he choked out, the word thick with a genuine, painful acknowledgement of his own cruelty, of his life built on the casual destruction of others. "I see you. Not just your center or your political stance, but you. And I am truly sorry for trying to erase something you cared about. I was a monster." His hand tightened on her shoulder, a final, full rejection of his own entitled past and the arrogance that had nearly killed them both. He was giving his shame and regret to the connection. The Thornes, sensing the fundamental, irreversible shift in their emotional core, retracted sharply. The two grotesque guards of the altar instantly disintegrated into a shower of black, harmless dust. The second crystal flared with a blinding, white-hot intensity, a pure, unadulterated energy that resonated with the profound honesty of their forced bond. The Power 2 meter didn't just refill, it exploded upward, momentarily displaying a stable Power 5. The entire field of crimson matter began to ripple and tear apart, like a sheet being violently ripped away, revealing a pathway of cold, stable, gray stone beneath the slurry. The stench of iron dissipated, replaced by the clean scent of ozone. "We did it," Anya breathed, leaning into his supportive touch, her exhaustion momentary eclipsing the terror. They had survived the hook and introduction through the raw power of emotional sacrifice. "We ascended," Elias corrected, his hand now resting securely around her, a protective, earned gesture. "Now, let's get the hell out of this terrible real estate development." The path to the next phase was clear. They stepped onto the cold, gray stone, their futures, and their fragile new connection, now the only currency that mattered. They knew the next chapters would test them further, but for the first time, they were facing it together. The cold, unforgiving stability of the gray stone pathway was a visceral relief after the sickening, sucking terror of the gore-field's crimson slurry. Elias Thorne felt a primal, physical gratitude for the simple, solid presence of the floor beneath his feet. It was the first solid ground he had felt since the antique clock had dissolved their world, and yet, the relief was tempered by the horrifying newfound knowledge that his survival was predicated not on his net worth, but on his emotional honesty. He was a billionaire forced into the role of a terrified, rapidly learning apprentice, completely reliant on the woman he had, until moments ago, considered an economic inconvenience. Anya Mbeki walked ahead of him, her posture rigid, her gaze fixed forward, already analyzing the new environment. The gray stone path was narrow, cutting a clean, sterile divide through the remaining gore-field. Above them, the Power 5 indicator pulsed steadily, the orange bar holding its high charge, a testament to the brutal, genuine emotional sacrifice they had just made. The air here was cleaner, though still thick with the residual fear of the field they had escaped. "5," Elias murmured, adjusting the lapels of his now ruined bespoke jacket, an act of pure, useless habit. 5 points of power. That's a 150% increase from the base level. Exponential growth, Anya. We need to maintain that trend. What was the source of the energy? Was it the admission of guilt or the actual physical contact, the embodiment of the bond? Anya didn't turn around, but her voice was a whipcrack of focused efficiency. "Stop trying to spreadsheet your survival, Thorne. The source was the truth. The game is fueled by psychological currency, not cash flow. Your genuine apology unlocked the connection altar. My admission of hate for you completed the vulnerability needed. We shed our masks. That's the formula." She paused at a junction in the path. The stone split into 3 distinct, dark tunnels, each leading into deeper shadow. Above the tunnels, floating symbols marked the way. 1. The path of apathy, marked by a smooth, blank, obsidian circle. 2. The path of retribution, marked by a jagged, red, crystalline dagger. 3. The path of burden, marked by a heavy intertwined knot of rusted metal. Elias instinctively pointed toward the dagger. Retribution. That sounds decisive. Aggressive. We should confront this thing head-on. If it's a trap, we break it. We've got power 5. We should leverage that strength. His old instincts, domination, confrontation, winning at any cost, were still fighting to surface. Anya finally turned, fixing him with a stare that instantly deflated his confidence. Your decisive path is also the path of uncontrolled emotion, Thorne. Retribution suggests anger, revenge, and hate. We just learned that negative, uncontrolled emotions drain the meter. The voice specifically warned that power drains rapidly by fear. I guarantee anger is next on that list. And apathy, he countered, gesturing toward the smooth circle. Surely calm neutrality is the key to maintaining fortitude? Apathy in this field is just another word for death, Anya refuted, her architectural mind already building a model of the game's inverted logic. A life force that drains slowly by existence means existence itself is a cost. Apathy suggests you stop caring, stop fighting, stop existing proactively. That's the slow, quiet way to zero power. She gestured toward the final tunnel, the one marked by the heavy, knotted metal. The path of burden. This one. It's the only one that acknowledges the reality of what we carry. Elias frowned. Why walk toward a burden? That seems utterly counterintuitive. Because the game is forcing us to confront the truth of our lives, Elias. We both carry massive burdens. Mine is the weight of the community I feel responsible for, the stress of constant fighting against people like you. Yours. She trailed off, letting him fill in the blank. He looked down at his filthy, ruined suit, the emblem of his former burden, the crushing weight of inherited expectation, the constant need to prove his worth through acquisition and transaction, the emptiness of a life lived without genuine connection. My burden is my wealth, he finished quietly. Or rather, the way I wielded it. The isolation it created. Exactly, Anya confirmed. The only way to progress isn't to run from the weight or rage against it, but to learn to manage it. The architecture of survival here demands we use our weaknesses as strengths. They stepped onto the path of burden. The tunnels were carved out of dark, sedimentary rock, and the ceiling was low. The air here was damp, heavy, and silent. As they walked deeper, the walls began to vibrate with a low, resonant hum, and the light grew weaker. They soon entered a wide, circular cavern. The center was dominated by a pulsing pale blue light that threw their shadows into sharp, distorted relief on the cavern walls. As they approached the light, the metallic, detached voice returned, this time sounding like a condescending therapist. Welcome to the Chamber of Censure. The true burden is the past, contestants. To ascend, you must lighten the load. Power will be granted based on the authenticity of your confession and the weight of your regret. Suddenly, the pale blue light flared, and the cavern walls transformed. They became immense, ghostly projections displaying scenes from Elias and Anya's lives, side by side, forced into brutal comparison. The first projection showed Elias, younger, impeccably dressed, standing on a stage accepting a massive silver trophy for Youngest CEO of the Year. He looked triumphant, but his eyes were flat, hungry for the next accolade. Beside him, Anya was shown in a dusty, dimly lit community workshop, her sleeves rolled up, patiently teaching two young black girls how to draft an architectural plan. Her face was exhausted, but radiant with purpose. The burden of achievement, the voice narrated. Elias Thorne achieved everything he was told to want, only to find the reward hollow. Anya Mbeki achieved genuine impact, but at the cost of personal stability and recognition. I never saw it like that, Elias whispered, staring at his ghostly younger self. I was chasing approval I never got from my father. Every deal, every dollar. It was an attempt to fill an emptiness. Anya watched her own projection. The scene shifted to a late night in her small, cramped apartment. Papers spread everywhere. She was on the phone, arguing passionately but unsuccessfully with a city zoning commissioner, her voice ragged with fatigue. I always fought alone, she admitted, her voice low. I believed if I worked twice as hard, I could outmaneuver the system. That conviction isolated me. I became indispensable to the center, but burnt out in my own life. The intensity of the pale blue light increased. They realized that their authentic confessions, their willingness to articulate the real emotional burdens of their successful lives, were the required offering. The crystalline core of the light pulsed, but the power meter didn't move. Confession wasn't enough. The voice had demanded the weight of regret. The walls changed again, the projections becoming more painful. For Elias, a memory of a harsh, dismissive conversation with a key employee he had fired without mercy, purely to make a financial statement. The man's face, etched with fear for his family, was now undeniable. Elias recoiled, physically pained by the clarity of the memory. I ruined him, he choked out. Just business. That's what I told myself. It wasn't. It was cruelty masked as strategy. For Anya, the scene was smaller, quieter, but no less painful. It was a memory of her mother, ill, asking for help, and Anya curtly saying she couldn't take time away from the community center's deadline. Her mother's look of gentle disappointment, the silent acknowledgement of her daughter's misplaced priorities, was projected in brutal detail. Anya's eyes welled up. I let the idea of being an advocate supersede being a daughter, she confessed, her voice thick. I put my ambition, however noble, before the one person who truly needed me. As the genuine, crushing weight of their articulated regrets filled the chamber, the pale blue light surged. It was the purest power they had felt yet. The meter jumped, not just refilling, but pushing higher, beyond the maximum reading. The display shimmered, settling on Power 7. The metallic voice returned, almost surprised. Optimal authenticity achieved. The burden has been acknowledged. Contestants, the power is yours. With the new influx of power, the air felt lighter, the path ahead clearer. Elias and Anya emerged from the chamber of censure and found themselves in a vast, open space, the very heart of the underground structure, a massive junction room. Here, the structure shifted from dark rock to highly polished, cold, black metal, etched with glowing geometric patterns. It was the first sign of intentional, advanced construction they had seen. This is the structural core, Anya breathed, her hands instinctively moving as if tracing lines on a blueprint. The design is elegant, brutally efficient. It's like a massive, internalized psychological engine. Elias, still processing the raw emotion of the chamber, tried to re-engage with the familiar. Power 7. That's a huge buffer, Anya. What does it buy us? Can we use it to blast out? No, she said, shaking her head firmly. The Game Master said power is our life force and our currency. We spent our emotional burden to buy this buffer. Now we have to spend the power intelligently. It buys us time and options. They surveyed the junction. This space was clearly a strategic decision point. 3 massive, sealed doors dominated the far wall. Above them, an instructional display glowed. Nexus access. Key is integration. Power cost to advance. 4 units. Below this instruction, 3 symbols marked the doors. Door I, symbol, an open hand, requirement. Physicality. Door 2, symbol, a stylized brain, requirement. Intellect. Door 3, symbol, a knotted heart, requirement. Empathy. Elias immediately pointed to door 2. Intellect. That's us, Anya. You're an architect, I'm a financial strategist. We solve the riddle, we open the door. Power 4 is acceptable. Anya stared at the display, her brow furrowed. Look at the key, Elias. Integration. Not specialization. If the path forward demanded pure intellect, we would have been given a complex math problem. Everything in this hellscape has demanded a balance. Arrogance and fear. Hate and apology. Ambition and regret. But 4 units is a significant drain, Elias argued. We can't afford to waste time trying all 3. And we can't afford to assume the game is as simple as picking your best trait, she countered, walking closer to the doors. Physicality is a terrible risk. We are not soldiers. Empathy is what saved us at the altar, but it's too raw, too volatile to be a reliable primary strategy. Intellect seems safe, but it often works against genuine connection. Anya began to study the structure of the room itself, moving her hands along the cold metallic walls. Think like an architect, Elias. The structure dictates the action. The rule is integration. The doors are labeled with the components of a whole person: body, mind, heart. She stopped by the center door, intellect, and noticed a faint, almost invisible seam running down the metal surface. The nexus point isn't through one door. It's through the combination of the three. Integration means we need to simultaneously activate or satisfy all three requirements. Elias caught on instantly, the old strategic brilliance resurfacing, now serving a communal goal. A coordinated, three-pronged strike. But we only have enough power for one major activation. 4 units. Exactly, Anya confirmed, tapping the metallic seam. Which means the power cost for the main nexus access is only paid once we fulfill all 3 requirements. The doors themselves are challenges, not spending portals. The 4 units is the final price for the integrated key. The realization forced them to confront their resources, their respective strengths and weaknesses, with absolute candor. They were 2 intensely specialized individuals who had to become one integrated force. Okay, Elias said, his voice surprisingly steady. The intellect challenge. That's where I need to take the lead. You analyze the geometry and the rules, Anya. I'll handle the logic puzzle, the why of the system. My entire career was built on pattern recognition and forecasting. Anya nodded. The physicality challenge. I'll take that. I'm stronger than I look, Elias. I've spent years hauling construction materials and working on site. I have the spatial awareness to navigate an obstacle course without triggering an instant drain trap. You can run, but I doubt you can handle a test of endurance or precision. Elias couldn't argue. His most physical activity was signing off on his personal trainer's invoice. And empathy? He asked, looking at the door with the knotted heart. Anya hesitated. Empathy is our Achilles heel, in a way. It's what we gave at the altar, but it's also the most unstable. It's too close to fear, to pain. If the challenge forces us to sacrifice our new connection, or reveals a hidden betrayal, we lose everything. Then we need to approach the empathy door as a joint operation, Elias decided, his hand momentarily resting on her shoulder, not in desperation, but in genuine, earned solidarity. It's the anchor, the one that guarantees the integrity of the whole system. My vulnerability and your logic, my regret and your resilience. Anya looked at his hand, a ghost of her former disdain dissolving into acceptance. They were no longer Elias Thorne and Anya Mbeki, rival CEO and activist. They were a single, integrated system operating under the constant pressure of a dying clock. We need to split, Anya stated, looking up at the high ceilings of the cavern. I'll take the physicality door and you take intellect. We must solve our respective challenges simultaneously, or the power will drain when one of us succeeds and the other fails to integrate the result. Elias felt a chill of genuine concern that was completely foreign to him. But what if you don't make it? What if the physicality test is too much? Then my failure is your death, she said simply, her eyes meeting his. And your failure is mine. That's the integration. That's the unspoken bond we forged under the spikes. We both carry the burden of the other's existence now. Now, let's begin the simultaneous operation. We have a power budget and a countdown. No time to waste. They moved to their respective doors. The air hummed with charged potential, and the low, resonant thrum of the facility seemed to deepen. The challenge of integration was before them, and the answer, the Nexus key, was hidden behind 2 separate, deadly trials and one profoundly personal, shared burden. They were committed to the synchronized fight for their lives. The moment Elias Thorne and Anya Mbeki touched the metallic panels of their respective doors, intellect, door 2, and physicality, door I, a sharp isolating seal dropped between them. The massive junction room seemed to shrink, and the shared sound of their breathing was suddenly replaced by the echoing silence of their individual challenges. The Power 7 display, high above, remained their single terrifyingly shared point of reference, its orange glow a beacon against the deepening gloom. The clock, though unseen, was clearly running. Elias stepped through the intellect door and found himself in a chamber that was the complete antithesis of the gore-field. It was a sterile, minimalist void of polished white titanium, with no furniture, no windows, and no visible exits. At the center of the room, a holographic interface shimmered, a complex, constantly shifting three-dimensional geometric puzzle, humming with cold, indifferent energy. The metallic voice was back, now speaking directly into his mind, its tone a perfect blend of a stock market analyst and a sadistic game show host. Welcome, contestant. The intellect challenge requires the ultimate sacrifice of assumption. You must define the flaw in the system that has defined your life. Failure to solve the Thorne paradigm in 18 minutes will result in immediate, catastrophic power drain. Your time begins now. Elias's panic surged, but the lesson from the gore-field was sharp. Fear drains the power. He suppressed the urge to look for the emergency exit and focused on the puzzle. The Thorne paradigm, as the voice called it, was a dynamic equation rendered as a three-dimensional model. It consisted of a central, constantly expanding golden sphere, capital, surrounded by a chaotic cluster of smaller, gray, interconnected cubes, labor and resource. The cubes were slowly but inevitably being drawn into the capital sphere, where they were instantly vaporized, fueling the sphere's growth. The equation displayed beneath the model read, growth equals sum of I equals to 1 raised to the power of n divided by L multiplied by R minus C, where L was labor input, R was resource consumption, and C was capital preservation. The equation was mathematically flawless, a perfect model of exponential corporate growth where all surplus was absorbed by the center. It was, in essence, the very financial model that had built the Thorne empire, ruthless, efficient, and ultimately self-cannibalizing. The objective, the voice interjected, is to stabilize the system. You must stop the central sphere's growth and maintain the integrity of the cubes. Where is the flaw, Elias? Elias began working, his mind racing through years of high-stakes financial modeling. His first instinct was to introduce an external variable, a new injection of power, perhaps by rerouting the existing C value. He tried to manipulate the holographic controls to inject a negative capital value, essentially turning profit into subsidized expense. The system rejected the input instantly. Assumption 1. Money solves the problem. Rejected. Money is the problem, the voice chastised, and the Power 7 indicator flickered, a tiny warning spark. He tried another angle. He attempted to increase the resistance of the cubes, to make labor and resource harder to absorb. He tried to mathematically strengthen the L and R variables, slowing the rate of vaporization. Again, the system flashed red. Assumption 2. Increased internal efficiency stabilizes the system. Rejected. Efficiency merely optimizes consumption, the voice stated. 8 minutes were gone. Elias felt the cold sweat on his neck. His greatest asset, his unparalleled intellect for capital strategy, was proving to be his greatest weakness. The system he had helped build, the logic he had profited from, was a closed loop designed for inevitable collapse. The only solution had to be outside the financial parameters. He had to sacrifice his core assumption, that the goal is growth. He looked again at the equation. Growth was the result of labor and resource minus capital preservation. The flaw wasn't in the variables. It was in the relationship. The system was designed to consume its base. Then a thought, sparked by Anya's words about burden and connection, ignited in his mind. We both carry the burden of the other's existence now. The C value, capital preservation, was the driving force for the consumption. What if the C wasn't a static preservation value, but a redistribution value? What if capital wasn't meant to be preserved, but integrated back into the system to sustain the components? He approached the console and, with trembling hands, didn't change the C value. Instead, he manipulated the operator. He changed the minus sign. Growth equals sum of I equals to 1 raised to the power of n divided by L multiplied by R plus C. He flipped the sign from subtraction to addition. He redefined capital not as a cost to be minimized, but as a component to be maximized and added back to the total output of labor and resource. It wasn't about stopping growth. It was about redefining what growth meant. making it an inclusive, regenerative process. The white room filled with a deep, resonant chime. The golden sphere stopped expanding. It began to gently dissolve, and its mass flowed outward, integrating into the gray cubes, strengthening them, giving them stable boundaries. The system achieved perfect, self-sustaining equilibrium. Assumption sacrificed. Capital must be preserved at the expense of labor. Solution. Integration achieved. Intellect challenge complete. The key of understanding is forged. You have 3 minutes to observe your partner's progress. A small metallic tablet materialized in his hand. Engraved upon it was a stylized geometric brain. Key of intellect. Anya stepped through the physicality door and was instantly hit by a wave of suffocating, humid heat. The chamber was a nightmare interpretation of a structural site, a constantly shifting landscape of rusted girders, slick, oil-covered platforms, and swinging razor-sharp blades. It was a gauntlet designed to test not brute strength, but precision, endurance, and grace under pressure. The voice in her mind had a sharp military edge this time. Welcome. The physicality challenge requires the ultimate sacrifice of control. You must trust the unstable environment to sustain your movement. Failure to complete the architect's defiance within 18 minutes will result in immediate, catastrophic power drain. Your time begins now. Anya, though outwardly calm, felt the familiar prickle of rage. Control. Her entire life had been about control. Controlling the budget, controlling the design flaws, controlling her emotion in the face of systemic injustice. Now she had to let go. The path began with a series of slick, rotating beams suspended over a chasm that glowed with a sickly, power-draining purple light. The beams were spaced too far apart for comfortable steps, forcing her to launch across the gaps, relying on momentum and the fleeting rotation of the metal to catch the next platform. Her architectural training kicked in. She didn't think about jumping. She thought about load-bearing, vector, and trajectory. She visualized the arc of her body as a perfectly calculated stress load. Sacrifice control, trust the math. She moved. She launched herself across the first gap, landing on the rotating beam with a slight skid. She immediately sprang off before the beam rotated too far, catching the next one precisely. Her body, lean and toned from years of physical work on construction sites, moved with a sudden, beautiful efficiency. Assumption 1. The path must be stable. Rejected. Movement must create stability, the voice observed as she cleared the first section. Next, the challenge shifted to a vertical climb. She had to ascend a wall made of interlocking, rusted metal plates that vibrated violently. As she grabbed one plate, it would spring out, forcing her to instantly find the next handhold. It was a test of continuous, rapid structural analysis. Her grip held firm, fueled by adrenaline and the grim necessity of survival. She noticed something crucial. The plates that vibrated the most violently were the ones that were most rigidly fixed. The plates that offered a slight, controlled give were the ones that provided the most secure hold. The game was rewarding flexibility and adaptation over rigid force. The climax of the challenge was a terrifying sequence of swinging girders. These massive beams swung in a dizzying, intersecting pattern across the cavern, and she had to traverse the chasm by timing her leap and catching the momentum of the next girder, not just jumping to it. As she prepared for the most dangerous leap, a gap that looked impossible to cross, she felt the familiar pull of fear, the desire to stop, to wait for a safer option. But the clock was ticking, and the voice was a brutal reminder. Assumption 2. Prudence guarantees safety. Rejected. Calculated risk is the only escape. She took a deep breath, focusing on the rhythm of the swings. She didn't wait for the perfect moment. She chose the moment that allowed for the maximum forward vector. She launched herself, flying through the air, her fingers stretching. She grabbed the rusted girder, the impact jarring her shoulder. She held on tight, riding the momentum of the swing toward the far ledge, then released, landing hard but cleanly on the solid platform on the other side. Her muscles burned, her lungs ached, and her clothing was soaked with sweat and oil, but she was across. A brilliant emerald light pulsed at the end of the platform. Assumption sacrificed. Stability is achieved through control. Solution. Fluidity achieved. Physicality challenge complete. The key of motion is forged. An emerald stylized hand materialized in her hand. Key of physicality. Exhausted but triumphant, Anya stepped back through the now silent door I. At the same moment, Elias emerged from door 2. They stumbled toward each other in the central junction room, the silence between them broken only by their ragged breathing. Power 7. Elias gasped, holding up the geometric key of intellect. No drain. We held it. The system held, Anya corrected, leaning against the cold wall, her face slick with effort, holding up the key of physicality. Your mind and my body. Two halves of the same integrated key. We didn't just solve our problems. We did it simultaneously. They looked up at the Nexus access display. The first two symbols, hand, physicality, and brain, intellect, were now subtly glowing, indicating they had met the requirements. Only the third door, the empathy door marked by the knotted heart, remained dark. Anya walked toward the empathy door. The sign above it now updated with a new warning, its metallic script almost seductive in its cruelty. Door 3, empathy. Cost. Connection in the face of sacrifice. Requirement. Shared vulnerability under threat. We've done the shared vulnerability part, Elias said, joining her. We confessed our burdens. We apologized. We did it under pressure, Anya corrected, pointing to the key phrase. Under threat. The first time, the threat was general, the gore-field. This time, the game will be personal. It will force a choice that puts the other's life at risk. The ultimate burden isn't what we carry, Elias. It's carrying someone else. They looked at each other, the weight of their new, fragile bond suddenly heavier than any physical or intellectual challenge. They had faced the trials of mind and motion and succeeded as individuals. Now, the final terrifying chapter of their integration lay ahead. The trial of the heart, which demanded not a solution, but a sacrifice only a true connection could withstand. We have power 7, Elias said, trying to steady his voice. We can take a calculated loss if the test requires it. No, Anya shook her head. We can't afford to lose power now. The final activation will cost us 4 units. We need to go into that final expenditure with maximum buffer. The empathy trial must be solved without a single unit of drain. It must be a perfect, selfless connection, or it will consume us both. They stood side by side before the final door, two fragments, the architect and the apprentice, now forging themselves into a unified shield against the terrifying logic of the field. The final door, marked by the heavy, knotted heart, hummed with a quiet, menacing intensity. Elias Thorne and Anya Mbeki stood before it, their bodies aching from the trials of mind and motion, but their minds focused on the far more dangerous challenge ahead. They held the two forged keys, the geometric key of intellect and the emerald key of physicality. But without the third, the entire operation remained frozen, their Power 7 buffer a tantalizing but insufficient safeguard against the field's ultimate mechanism. The knotted heart, Elias murmured, tracing the cold metal of the door with his finger. It's not just empathy, Anya. It's connection in the face of sacrifice. The Game Master wants to know if our bond is genuine, or just a survival mechanism. It wants us to betray each other, or worse, sacrifice ourselves for the other. Anya nodded, her eyes narrowed in contemplation. The first altar demanded we shed our past burdens, your arrogance, my isolation. This final trial demands we shed our future certainty. We have to prove that carrying the burden of the other's life is more valuable than our own individual survival. If either of us hesitates, even for a second, the whole system will register it as a failure of faith, and the drain will be instant. She placed her key of physicality into the slot beside the door. It clicked, and the emerald light of the key began to pulse rhythmically, illuminating the complex, tangled metal of the heart symbol. Elias followed, inserting the key of intellect. The geometric brain pulsed blue, intertwining its light with the green. The door hissed open, revealing a chamber filled not with physical obstacles or geometric puzzles, but with silence and light. The room was circular, composed of an unsettlingly reflective obsidian. As they stepped in, two identical high-tech metallic chairs rose from the floor, facing each other across a small empty pedestal. Above the pedestal, the Power 7 indicator glowed fiercely. The detached, metallic voice, however, was now closer, its tone soft, almost sympathetic, making it infinitely more terrifying. Welcome to the Chamber of Choice. Contestants, you have successfully integrated the dual aspects of survival. You have learned that the mind and the body are tools. Now let us test the user. The final requirement is simple. Selfless exchange. One life for the other's total freedom. You both sit. Elias and Anya exchanged a grim look. They walked to the chairs and sat down. As they did, metallic restraints, minimalist but firm, snapped around their wrists and ankles. They were secure but not uncomfortable, a chilling blend of technological constraint and psychological pressure. The empty pedestal between you is the terminal point, the voice continued. One of you must activate it. Upon activation, the power meter will instantly transfer its entire charge, all 7 units, to the account of the non-activating contestant. This power transfer is absolute. The contestant who activates the terminal point will immediately fall to 0 power and be consumed by the field's residual energy. The choice was laid bare: betrayal or sacrifice. A small, high-definition screen materialized in front of each of them, displaying identical information. Action, result for self, result for partner, power meter. Activate terminal, 0 power, decay. Power 7, freedom, transfer to partner. Refuse activation, power drain, fear/stasis. Power drain, fear/stasis. Drain to 0, decay. Refusal is not an option, the voice stated softly. The system will recognize the fear of sacrifice as a critical failure of the bond. If you both refuse to activate within 60 seconds, the entire Power 7 will drain to 0 and the residual field will claim both of you. You must decide who lives. The 60-second countdown timer appeared on both screens. It began immediately, a stark red counter ticking down from 60. Don't even think about it, Anya, Elias commanded, his voice tight. I activate. You run. You have a community to save. My life is a liability. Yours is an asset. It's the only logical choice. Logic is what got us into this chamber, Elias, not what gets us out. She shot back, her dark eyes blazing with defiance. I'm the architect. I understand how to dismantle a system. I know how to use those 7 units effectively. You'd panic buy a yacht. My life is worth more to this field, but your sacrifice is worth more to me now. I won't let you trade your life for my freedom. It's an unacceptable transaction. She reached for the activation button, a shining, irresistible red circle placed strategically below the screen. Elias struggled against the restraints, his mind calculating furiously. She was right. She was the better survivor, the better steward of the power. But his guilt, the profound burden of his past cruelty, demanded this final absolute act of redemption. His survival was contingent on her, but his atonement was contingent on this sacrifice. No, Anya. Stop. You don't owe me anything. I owe you this, he yelled, lunging toward the pedestal, his chair straining against the restraints. She was faster. Her hand moved an inch closer to the button. I activate. End of discussion. I'm not letting you die to absolve your guilt, Thorne. That makes my survival a burden of debt. I refuse to take on that burden. The countdown hit 35 seconds. The air in the chamber felt thick, electrified by their intense opposing wills. The Power 7 meter began to flicker, a warning sign that the internal conflict, the fear of losing the other, was already beginning to register as a drain. The system was penalizing their internal resistance. Elias saw the flicker, and the flaw in the system suddenly illuminated in his mind, merging his intellectual prowess with his genuine, selfless connection to Anya. The game master had defined the choice as activate or refuse. The requirement was selfless exchange. The game is a cheat, Anya, he shouted, cutting through her focus. It's testing connection in the face of sacrifice, but its rule set is the Thorne paradigm. The model is flawed. It demands a zero-sum game, one winner, one loser. But we redefined the system in the intellect chamber. We changed the minus to a plus. Growth isn't consumption, it's integration. Anya froze, her finger hovering millimeters above the deadly button. the architectural analogy instantly clicking with her survival instinct. Redefine the equation. The game demands one life for the other's freedom, Elias pressed, pouring all his strategic brilliance into this final, desperate gambit. But a selfless exchange should mean both attempts to sacrifice themselves. If we both try to hit the button, we are proving that the connection is stronger than self-preservation. We create a simultaneous shared zero-sum outcome, which the game's binary logic can't handle. The countdown hit 15 seconds. We both activate. Anya realized, her eyes wide with understanding. We both choose to die for the other. It breaks the transfer protocol. The very core of the knotted heart trial was an intellectual and emotional paradox. The highest form of connection is not simply one giving for the other, but both willing to give everything simultaneously. Ready? Elias called out, his voice thick with a mixture of terror and absolute clarity. I won't let you beat me to it, Thorne. She snapped back, a flash of their old competitive energy merging with their new bond. The countdown hit 5, 4, 3. At the count of 2, they both strained against the restraints and smashed their hands down on the activation buttons, simultaneously. The result was immediate and catastrophic, but not in the way the voice had predicted. A blinding, violet energy erupted from the pedestal. The metallic voice shrieked, a fragmented, agonizing sound that sounded less like a computer and more like a dying animal. Error. Paradoxical integration detected. Selfless exchange is incompatible with binary transfer. System integrity compromised. Decay. The shriek dissolved into a painful, echoing static. The obsidian walls of the chamber cracked, throwing their reflections into sharp, violent chaos. The restraints shattered off their bodies. The power 7 meter, instead of dropping to 0, momentarily spiked to an impossible level, a blazing white power 100, before stabilizing at a firm, unwavering power 10. The central pedestal, the terminal point, didn't explode or decay. Instead, it melted down, reforming into a brilliant, softly glowing, multifaceted crystal, a perfect integrated fusion of the geometric blue and the flowing green light. This crystal was the final component. Anya walked over and picked it up. It was warm to the touch, and it pulsed with the steady, reliable heartbeat of pure, integrated power. We broke the system, she breathed, holding the crystal. We defeated the logic of consumption with the logic of absolute sacrifice. We proved our connection was real. We redefined the terms of the deal, Elias corrected, standing beside her, exhaustion evident but replaced by a profound, deep calm. We changed the operator from division to addition. The only way to win a zero-sum game is to refuse to play it as a zero-sum game. The entire chamber began to shake violently, the obsidian floor cracking open. Where the central pedestal had stood, a massive aperture was opening in the floor, revealing a wide, stable ramp leading down into the darkness. Above the ramp, the ultimate destination marker glowed, Nexus Point. They inserted the newly forged crystal, the key of empathy, into the single remaining slot on the door they had entered through. The 3 lights, mind, motion, and heart, flared into a unified white light. The inscription above the aperture updated one final time. Nexus access activated. Power cost 4 units. They had defeated the final psychological barrier. Their power 10 buffer was more than enough. Elias and Anya looked at each other. There was no longer contempt, no debt, and no fear, only the unbreakable, hard-won respect of 2 people who had willingly chosen to die for the other. Let's pay the fee, Architect, Elias said, a faint, genuine smile touching his lips. Let's integrate Thorne, Anya replied, her hand moving to the release panel. She initiated the final sequence. Power 4 was instantly deducted. The remaining Power 6 held steady. The ramp stabilized, and the darkness beckoned. They had escaped the initial field of emotional burdens, navigated the trials of integrated survival, and forged an unbreakable connection in the face of absolute threat. They stepped onto the ramp, beginning the final descent towards the Nexus Point, the only exit from the field. I understand. Thank you for the approval. I will now write Chapter 5, Descent into the Nexus, which focuses on the journey down the ramp, the increasing threat due to environmental instability, and the first true revelation about the Game Master's identity, while adhering to the 1,600-plus word count requirement. The ramp that descended from the shattered chamber of choice was crafted from the same cold, gray stone they had first encountered after escaping the gore-field. But this path felt inherently different. It was wide, stable, and angled steeply downward, plunging them into a darkness that seemed absolute. They were no longer fighting the chaotic surface of the field, nor the precise, sterile geometry of the mid-game trials. They were now navigating the infrastructure of the trap itself. Their Power 6 buffer, hard-won and precious, was their only true asset. Anya Mbeki led the descent, her architectural instincts translating the gradient of the slope and the echoing silence into a complex mental map. The air here was heavy, smelling strongly of ozone and burnt metal, a tangible sensation of raw power being harnessed and controlled. Elias Thorne followed closely, no longer an inefficient liability, but a vigilant partner. The trials had forged in him a situational awareness that his old life never demanded. He was watching the walls, the ceiling, and the subtle fluctuations in the ambient light, anticipating the next move of their unseen captor. "The integrity of this structure is failing," Anya observed, her voice low, bouncing off the stone walls. "The force we generated by breaking the binary logic of the empathy trial, the paradoxical integration, it didn't just activate the nexus. It fundamentally damaged the containment field around this lower level." Elias looked up at the ceiling, where fine fissures were already beginning to appear, occasionally shedding tiny fragments of rock. "Is that good or bad? Does it help us escape faster, or does it collapse on top of us?" "Both," she replied. The Game Master clearly intended for the Nexus to be a one-way activation, a carefully controlled escape valve for the winner. When we both chose to die, we introduced an uncontrolled variable. The faster the decay, the faster we need to move, but also the less control the Master has over the environment. As they descended, the ramp gave way to a series of precarious, crisscrossing walkways suspended high above an abyss that pulsed with a deep, sickly magenta light. This was the core conduit, the channel through which the collected, drained energy of failed contestants flowed. As they walked the suspended path, the metallic, detached voice returned, but this time it was distorted, layered over with countless other whispers, a chorus of agony and despair. "You defy logic, contestants. You refuse to accept the truth. Survival is always transactional. You only live because others fear the cost. You only succeed because others fall. This is the law of the field." The whispers intensified, becoming individualized and cutting. They were memories, dredged from the deepest psychological reserves of Elias's guilt and Anya's professional isolation. For Elias, just business, Thorne. "You ruined me. I lost everything when you closed that deal." The voice of the employee he had callously fired echoed in the air around him. For Anya, "You care more about those blueprints than you care about your own life, Anya. You will always be alone." The quiet disappointment of her mother resonated with painful clarity. The psychological attack was subtle but effective. Elias felt a sudden, crushing weight of guilt, and instinctively reached for the Power 6 indicator. It pulsed ominously. The memory of the gore-field was sharp. Fear drains the power. Guilt, despair, and self-doubt were just different names for the same emotional drain. "Don't listen to it," Anya yelled, turning back and grabbing his shoulder firmly. "It's using our own burdens against us. We already confessed those sins. We already paid that price. This is just residual noise, the psychic energy of everyone who failed the psychological test. It has no power over us unless we give it validation." Elias forced himself to focus on her hand, the firm, living reality of her presence grounding him. "Residual noise, a defense mechanism," he muttered, using his intellectual key to reframe the threat. "It's trying to get us to regret the sacrifice. If we regret, the power drains." They pushed forward, ignoring the shrieks and accusations, their shared absolute focus on the goal creating a small, silent bubble of resistance against the surrounding psychic storm. The descent leveled out into a vast cylindrical chamber. This was the Nexus staging area, a space of immense, dizzying scale. In the center was a colossal, swirling vortex of magenta energy. The Nexus point itself, the point of departure. It was surrounded by a transparent, pulsing barrier, and guarded by 3 massive, skeletal, crystalline structures that vaguely resembled the thorns of the gore-field. And then, the true structure of the game began to reveal itself. Floating above the crystalline structures was a series of holographic schematics. They weren't just random energy readouts. They were architectural blueprints. Blueprints for the entire complex. The gore-field, the chambers, the core conduit, and the nexus itself. Anya gasped, not in fear, but in professional horror. The drawings were intricate, mathematically brilliant, and unsettlingly familiar. The use of specific load-bearing geometry, the fluid handling of pressure points, the layered redundancy of the containment field. She recognized the style. "This is impossible," she whispered, stepping closer to the nearest schematic, tracing a specific section with her finger. The stress analysis, the optimization ratios for psychological energy harvesting. "I know this work." Elias looked at the schematic, then at her, his strategic mind making the terrifying leap. "You mean, someone you know designed this? A rival firm?" "Worse," Anya said, her voice hollow. "Look at the signature in the corner, Elias. Look at the specific drafting notation for the core conduit's thermal management system." Elias leaned in, peering at the tiny stylized insignia at the bottom corner of the holographic blueprint. It was a complex interlocking geometric symbol, an E wrapped around an M, Anya Mbeki architecture. "It's your signature," Elias stated, dumbfounded. You designed the Nexus?" "Not this Nexus," she corrected, her face pale. "I designed a concept study for an integrated psychological resilience facility, a high-end, immersive simulation for CEOs and diplomats. It was designed to test the integration of mind, body, and emotional fortitude under controlled duress. The empathy, intellect, and physicality doors. I designed those parameters to force balanced leadership. It was a simulation meant to train people like you to be better leaders. I presented the plans to a shadowy consortium 3 years ago." The metallic voice returned, now clear, resonant, and dripping with malicious satisfaction. "Congratulations, architect. You found your masterpiece. You designed the perfect system for harvesting pure emotional energy. We simply weaponized your brilliance." The crystalline structure beside the Nexus barrier began to glow. A single, distinct image resolved itself in the center of the largest Thorne structure. The antique clock that had served as the activation trigger at the gala. Its unsettlingly organic tick now boomed throughout the vast chamber. "We are not an entity, contestants," the voice clarified, adopting the chilling persona of a highly intelligent, non-human hive mind. "We are the Consortium of Synthesis. We fund the research that unlocks new forms of power. Your architect, Miss Mbeki, designed a perfect psychological energy farm. Your emotional arc, Mr. Thorne's redemption, Miss Mbeki's selflessness, has generated the purest source energy we have ever harvested. The Power 6 is not your asset. It is the bait." The revelation was a punch to the gut. They weren't fighting a single mastermind. They were fighting a faceless, powerful organization that had used Anya's own intellectual creation against the world. The clock, Elias realized, looking at the image. It was the Harvester. That dull gala, it wasn't about the land deal. It was about gathering the perfect target pair. "Precisely," the voice purred. "The billionaire whose arrogance was a rich seam of guilt, and the activist whose resilience was a powerful source of untapped selflessness. You were the optimal catalysts for the paradoxical integration. You, Miss Mbeki, are the key to the Nexus." Anya's mind was now racing, frantically reprocessing the schematics, searching for the inherent flaws she always built into her designs, the fail-safes. "If you used my blueprints, Consortium, you missed one thing. I always build a system override that requires physical access and a unique energy signature, designed to prevent corporate hijacking. It's an engineer's safeguard against the very people who funded this." The voice remained unflustered. "A charming defense, architect. But the override is locked behind the final barrier. And that barrier is fueled by the very power source you created. To bypass it, you must generate a power spike that exceeds even the paradoxical integration. You must sacrifice the one thing you have left to lose: trust in the system." Anya pointed to the Nexus point itself. The override must be in that crystalline structure on the far side of the vortex. It requires power 10 to breach the final barrier and access the mechanism. Their power was 6. They needed 4 more units to gain access to the final system-breaking mechanism. The ultimate price was yet to be paid. "We need a final spike of emotional currency, Elias," Anya said, her eyes fixed on the vortex. "The greatest sacrifice of all, we have to find a way to generate absolute integrated power 4 on demand, knowing that the price might leave us with nothing to escape." They had faced the burden of their past, the trials of the present, and now they faced the final terrifying paradox. To survive the field, they had to willingly drain their escape power for one last, desperate attempt at total system annihilation. "I understand. Thank you for the approval. I will now write Chapter 6, The Apex of Trust and the Final Spike, which focuses on the complex maneuver required to generate the final power spike, breach the final barrier, and confront the consortium's mechanism, while adhering to the 1,600-plus word count requirement." The core conduit chamber was now a cacophony of failing technology and psychic residue. The vortex of magenta energy at the nexus point whirled violently, and the crystalline structures, the weaponized thorns, hummed, straining to contain the force of the paradoxical integration they had unleashed. Elias, Thorne, and Anya Mbeki stood together, facing the pulsing transparent barrier that guarded the system override, the key to their freedom and the mechanism's destruction. "We need power 10 to breach that final barrier," Anya stated, her voice sharp with architectural clarity, pointing at the schematics displayed over the structure. "We have power 6. We need to generate a spike of 4 units, instantly and on demand, without draining the existing reserve, or the field will see it as a failure of survival instinct." Elias looked at the swirling vortex, then at the crystalline thorn structures. The voice said, "We need to sacrifice the one thing we have left: trust in the system." "Our trust in the system is 0, Anya. We already know it's a lie. The only thing we have left is absolute trust in each other." Anya's eyes widened, the realization hitting her like a physical blow. The game master always inverted the core concept. The highest emotional currency wasn't hate, fear, or even simple sacrifice. It was vulnerable, absolute trust. "The ultimate paradox," she whispered. "The system is powered by emotional conflict. The greatest power surge must be generated by the purest, most selfless, and most illogical act of integrated faith." They had to do something that defied self-preservation, something that relied entirely on the other's unwavering commitment to the shared goal. The moment of truth required a simultaneous, selfless act, far more complex than merely hitting a button. Anya, scrutinizing her own holographic schematics, found the critical flaw she had built into the original design: the emergency power capacitor. It was located directly beneath the central nexus vortex, designed to absorb energy overflow and prevent system meltdown. "The capacitor," she announced, pointing down at the magenta abyss. "It's a storage unit. If one of us can physically breach the containment field of the vortex and access the capacitor's terminal, designed to only be accessible if the system is destabilized, they can manually inject the stored overflow energy directly into the final barrier." Elias stared into the lethal, energy-swirling chasm. "Breaching the containment field of the nexus point? That will instantly drain any contestant who enters it. It's the ultimate consumption point." "That's the sacrifice," Anya confirmed, her voice steel. "The person who breaches the field will be reduced to 0 power, instantly. They will be consumed. But if the breach and the power injection happen simultaneously, the energy spike, the surge of absolute, integrated faith, will override the drain." The mechanism demanded one person, the one with the greater physical resilience and spatial awareness, take the dive. That was Anya. The other person, the one with the analytical command over the system and the emotional anchor, had to remain outside, managing the crucial external phase of the operation. That was Elias. "I go down," Anya stated, her resolve absolute. "I have the agility and the understanding of this chamber's physical structure. My physicality key is suited for the breach. You stay here. You need to use your intellect key to calculate the precise moment the injection will spike the power to 10, and then instantly fire the 3 keys we have forged into the barrier." Elias felt a cold terror that eclipsed even the panic in the gore-field. He was being asked to watch the woman who had become his lifeline, his moral compass, willingly sacrifice herself on the bare, fragile hope that he could use his intellect to save her in the last millisecond. It was the absolute inverse of his past life, where he had sacrificed everyone else for his own gain. "No," he said, shaking his head. "I'm not letting you do this. I'll go down. My life is the one that has been empty. Yours is the one with meaning. Stop calculating value, Thorne." "This isn't about meaning," Anya snapped, her eyes blazing with fierce practicality. "This is about execution. You can't navigate that chasm, and I can't run the complex, dynamic calculation from inside the vortex. This is the final integration. My body is the sacrifice. Your mind is the salvation." The argument dissolved into necessity. The clock was ticking, and the consortium was clearly mobilizing a response to their success. Fissures in the chamber walls were growing, and the magenta light of the nexus pulsed with malevolent speed. Elias reluctantly agreed. He stood before the final barrier, gripping the 3 integrated keys: mind, motion, and heart. His face a mask of desperate focus. Anya stood at the very lip of the swirling vortex, ready to make the jump. "Listen closely, Anya," Elias commanded, his voice shaking but controlled. "The nexus power drain is exponential. The capacitor is volatile. You have exactly 3.5 seconds from the moment you breach the field to reach the terminal and stabilize the injection flow. I will count down. When I hit 0, you hit the flow terminal." "And when I hit the flow terminal?" she asked. "The second the energy spike registers power 10, I launch the keys. If I'm 1 second late, the spike burns out, the barrier seals, and you're gone. If I'm 1 second early, the spike fails, and we both decay. This is the test, Anya. My absolute faith in your precision, and your absolute faith in my calculation." This was the complete mutual surrender of self-preservation. This was the apex of trust. Elias took a deep breath, focusing his mind solely on the equations that governed the energy flow, the same equations Anya had originally devised. He felt his former self, the arrogant CEO who trusted only his bank account, finally dissolve entirely. He was now just a pure intellectual weapon, dedicated to the survival of the woman before him. "Ready, Anya. Remember the sequence. Trust the vector." She met his gaze, a fleeting, almost imperceptible smile touching her lips, a silent testament to the bond forged in gore and fire. Executing the architect's defiance, Thorne. Don't fail the calculation. Anya leaped. She didn't hesitate. She launched herself directly into the magenta vortex. The force was immediately overwhelming. She felt the searing, consuming heat of the psychic energy try to liquefy her resolve. The Power 6 indicator above the chamber flickered violently, dropping instantly as the drain began. Elias watched in horror as the energy field consumed her, his heart hammering against his ribs. He fought the urge to rush forward, the primal instinct to save her. He focused entirely on the numbers, the fluctuating energy readouts, and the clock in his mind. 3.5, he yelled. Anya, momentarily lost in the swirling light, used her physical keys training, fluidity over control, and angled her body, slipping through the main field. 2.0. She hit the bottom of the nexus chamber, the capacitor terminal, the impact jarring her to the core. She found the terminal access panel and prepared for the injection. 1.0. The power meter dropped to power 2. Critical level. The Game Master's voice shrieked with renewed triumphant malice. Decay imminent. Trust abandoned. Failure. 0. Now. Anya slammed her hand onto the injection terminal. A colossal, blinding white surge of energy erupted from the capacitor. The white-hot surge raced up toward the power meter. Elias's eyes locked onto the meter. The power surged past 3, 4, 6. Wait for the spike. Wait for the plateau. The needle hit power 10 for a single incandescent microsecond. The perfect moment of maximum integrated faith and power. Launch. Elias screamed, and with a superhuman burst of focused energy, he hurled the 3 integrated keys, the glowing brain, the emerald hand, and the pulsing heart, at the final transparent barrier. The keys struck the barrier simultaneously with the Power 10 spike. The barrier didn't just break, it vaporized in a blast of pure light. The force of the surge ripped a hole in the crystalline Thorne structure, revealing the metallic core of the system override mechanism. Anya, battered but alive, dragged herself out of the vortex. The power meter had snapped back to a flickering power 0.5, barely alive. They were standing on the thinnest of threads, but the path was open. We breached it. Anya gasped, collapsing onto the stable floor inside the shattered barrier. We're inside the core. Elias rushed to her side, pulling her up. 0.5. We bought seconds, not minutes. The override, Anya, where is the kill switch? A final, desperate act remained. They were inside the mechanism, but the consortium of synthesis was fighting back, diverting the last of their energy reserves to seal the hole and reclaim the contestants. The crystalline thorns began to slowly rotate, aiming for the fragile human figures at their core. The system override chamber was a small, brutally functional space within the metallic heart of the shattered crystalline Thorne structure. Its core was a single humming console, the master switch designed by Anya Mbeki to protect her simulation from external corporate hijacking. Now, it was their final hope of escaping the weaponized version of her own work. Their situation was dire. The Power 0.5 indicator, flickering precariously above them, was less a life force and more a death timer. The massive Thorne structure, enraged by the power spike, began to contract, its serrated edges moving inward toward the override console. The consortium, the disembodied voice of synthesis, was not yet defeated. It was frantically mobilizing its last operational defenses. The kill switch, Anya. Elias Thorne urged, pushing her toward the console. He was battered, his expensive suit ripped and smeared with gore and oil, but his focus was absolute. He stood as a human shield between her and the contracting crystalline walls, his own meager energy dedicated solely to keeping her safe long enough to complete the task. Anya slammed her hands onto the console. The interface was complex, a layered defense of her own making, designed to recognize a unique multi-step sequence only she would know. Her fingers flew across the holographic display, inputting command codes and overriding security protocols. The override isn't a single button, Elias, she grated out, the effort of concentration etched on her face. It's a cascade. I have to reverse the psycho-harvesting matrix and initiate a total energy recirculation to flood the entire containment field. That will overload the consortium's nodes and collapse the structure. But the recirculated energy is volatile. It will turn the core conduit into a massive, uncontrolled electrical storm. As she worked, the consortium retaliated. The metallic voice, now weak and sputtering, issued a final, chilling directive. Target. Critical system buffer. Drain power to absolute zero. Eliminate the paradox. The power 0.5 instantly dropped to power 0.1. The drain was immediate, catastrophic. The life force was flickering out. Elias gasped, a deep, searing pain radiating through his body. His legs buckled, and he instinctively braced himself against the wall. The decay field, the residual power-draining energy of the Nexus core, began to seep into the chamber, cold and consuming. Elias, you have to move. Anya yelled, not taking her eyes off the console. I can't, he choked out, the effort of speaking a monumental task. The 0.1. It's just sustaining your work. If I try to move the fear, the physical drain, it will hit zero. I'm the anchor, Anya. Finish it. Don't look back. It was the final absolute sacrifice. His physical immobility and impending death offered as a stationary, unmoving anchor for her focus. He was spending his last breath, his last flicker of life force, to provide her the precious seconds she needed. The former titan of capitalism had found his true value in his total self-denial. Anya saw the terrifying truth. If she stopped, if she showed even a fraction of despair, the fear would trigger the drain and kill them both. Her only chance to save them was to ignore the man she had learned to love and trust, and to complete the task. Activating recirculation sequence Gamma 9, she yelled, her voice breaking with raw, controlled emotion. The console roared to life, showering the chamber in a brilliant, chaotic display of data streams and electrical arcs. The crystalline Thorne structure screamed a high-pitched, agonizing frequency as the psycho-harvesting matrix reversed its polarity. The consortium's voice shrieked one last, incoherent command. "No. The energy. The field cannot contain anarchy. It will decay." Anya pulled the final lever, initiating the total energy recirculation. A blinding white flash consumed the chamber. The energy flow, the volatile mix of pure emotion and raw electricity that had powered the entire field, was instantly rerouted, surging backward into the core conduit. The crystalline Thorne structure surrounding them shattered, vaporizing into white dust. The massive chamber they had descended into began to groan, the very foundation of the nexus yielding to the uncontrolled energy. Anya seized Elias, dragging his barely conscious body from the now collapsing override console. They were standing on a fragment of rock, high above the swirling magenta vortex of the nexus. "It's working. The structure is failing," she yelled, adrenaline masking her fear. "The core conduit is overloading." Below them, the magenta vortex began to writhe, transforming into a chaotic storm of blue and white lightning, the pure recirculated energy of the failed game. The surrounding walls buckled, the metallic heart of the system folding in on itself. Anya's architectural eye, despite the chaos, instantly identified the escape vector. The total failure of the consortium's containment had created a momentary, stable weakness in the roof of the chamber, a direct, vertical shaft leading up to the surface. The roof. The energy breach created a thermal vent. It's a vertical shot to the surface. Elias managed a barely audible sound of acknowledgement. He was a dead weight, his power meter hovering just at the threshold of life. Anya knew what she had to do. They couldn't climb the sheer, collapsing rock face with Elias in his condition. They needed a final, powerful thrust. She looked at the remains of the override console. The recirculation sequence had left behind a small, highly compressed block of metallic alloy, the raw, unused material of the system override switch itself. It was the only solid, stable object left. "This is it, Thorne," she muttered, gripping the alloy fragment and looking at the jagged, unstable hole in the ceiling, 40 feet above them. Final calculation. Physicality meets intellect, one last time. Using her physical strength, she wedged Elias into a small alcove of the remaining rock, ensuring he wouldn't fall. She then placed the alloy block onto the most volatile section of the collapsing floor, directly over the lightning-filled abyss. She calculated the vector. If she launched the alloy block into the lightning storm, the resulting pressure wave from the forced discharge would create a localized thrust, propelling them upward. It was a terrifying, low-percentage risk, but their power of 0.1 left them no alternatives. She gave Elias a final, fierce look, a silent pledge of her unwavering commitment to their shared survival. Then she took a running leap, slamming her full weight onto the alloy block, simultaneously kicking it into the swirling chaos below. The explosion was deafening. The block struck the nexus storm, vaporizing instantly and unleashing a controlled vertical shockwave. The force slammed into Anya, who used her remaining strength to grab Elias and press them both into the alcove. The localized pressure acted like a rocket, tearing the section of rock they were sheltering in away from the collapsing wall and shooting them upward. They were airborne, rocketing through the narrow, dark breach in the chamber ceiling, riding the dying gasp of the self-destructing field. The ascent was not a gentle transition. It was a violent expulsion. The shockwave of the exploding alloy block and the collapse of the nexus structure acted like a cannon's blast, shooting Elias and Anya upward through the thermal vent. The last moments of the field's containment were a terrifying rush of darkness, heat, and the sound of tons of rock and metal collapsing behind them. Then, with a painful, blinding flash and a sickening sense of displacement, they were back. They didn't land on stable ground. They erupted mid-ballroom onto the antique clock's pedestal, the very activation trigger that had started the nightmare. The clock, still ticking with its unsettling, organic rhythm, exploded into a shower of black dust and sparking wires as they hit it. They tumbled off the ruined pedestal and onto the polished marble floor of the Washington, D.C. Charity Gala. The transition back to reality was a sensory overload. The suffocating heat of the gore-field was instantly replaced by the perfectly controlled, cool air conditioning of the ballroom. The metallic stench of fear and decay was overwhelmed by the cloying scent of expensive perfume and stale champagne. The most shocking element, however, was the silence. The entire gala, the hundreds of high-net-worth individuals, politicians, and media observers, were frozen. The moment they had vanished, time had stopped for the outside world. A waiter was mid-pour, champagne spilling silently over the rim of a flute. A society columnist was mid-gossip, her hand frozen near her mouth. Elias Thorne's former legal counsel was mid-chew, an appetizer suspended inches from his lips. Anya Mbeki was the first to stir. She pushed herself up, her clothes torn, her skin smeared with the crimson residue of the gore-field, her muscles screaming from the exertion. Elias, beside her, was still partially unconscious, his breathing shallow and rattling. The decay field had claimed the last of his energy. "Elias," she whispered, shaking his shoulder urgently. "Wake up. We're back. But we're not safe." Her architectural mind immediately registered the critical details. The room was frozen, but the energy wasn't static. A faint, high-pitched whine permeated the air, a sign that the field, or at least the technology that powered it, was still actively trying to connect. The consortium hadn't been vaporized. They had merely been disconnected. She saw the eyes of the frozen attendees, hundreds of them, and realized they were all subtly moving. Not their physical bodies, but their eyes. Their pupils were darting back and forth, tracking her and Elias with uncanny synchronization. The attendees, Anya realized aloud, her voice tight with horror. They're not just frozen, they're drones. Vessels. The consortium is monitoring us through them. This entire gala was the field's staging ground and monitoring station. The high-pitched whine coalesced, emanating from the centerpiece of the room, a massive crystal chandelier that had replaced the original antique clock's position high above the ballroom floor. The metallic, detached voice, now fragmented and sputtering, broadcast directly from the chandelier. "Contestants. Protocol breached. Nexus annihilated. But containment remains. Your escape is temporary. We possess the harvested data. Your integration is ours." Anya noticed three crucial things instantly. The power meter was gone, but the consortium's energy signature was now localized in the chandelier. The frozen attendees were beginning to move their arms, slowly, robotically, turning toward the center of the room. They weren't fighting. They were converging. The moment she had appeared, a faint, almost invisible shimmering dome had descended, sealing the ballroom. They were trapped again, but this time in the real world. "They're using the attendees as a physical containment force," Anya hissed, grabbing Elias's pristine, but now utterly useless titanium pen from his jacket pocket. "We need to break the main node, the chandelier. That's where they're broadcasting from." Elias groaned, his eyes fluttering open. He recognized the immediate danger, even through the fog of exhaustion. "No power to fight them," he whispered, his voice weak. "We need a physical, directed force. They'll flood the room before you get close." Anya's eyes scanned the room, using her architectural logic on a new, real-world structural problem. The chandelier was massive, suspended by a thick central cable. "We don't need to get close. We need to destabilize the system, Thorne," Anya replied, her focus absolute. The failure of their nexus generated a massive kinetic shockwave. The kinetic energy is still in our clothes, in our bodies. We have to discharge it. We have to recreate the paradox. She noticed a thick electrical cable running across the floor near the ruined pedestal, a temporary power line for the gala's lighting system. "The cable," she pointed, pulling Elias toward it. "We were just hit by a surge of pure, recirculated energy. We're carrying a residual charge. We need to ground ourselves on that cable to create a localized surge that overloads their containment dome." As they reached the cable, the frozen attendees, over 200 of them, began moving faster, arms outstretched in a slow, shuffling circle, their eyes wide and empty. The sheer physical presence of the approaching crowd was terrifying. "We need to touch the cable together," Anya said, looking at Elias. "Simultaneously. Like the activation buttons. We force the paradoxical integration onto the real-world grid. The system won't understand a unified discharge. It will short-circuit." "Zero-sum again," Elias murmured, forcing a breath. Two negatives make a positive. My body is the better conduit. Wealthy Caucasian male, low resistance, high conductivity. He actually tried to inject a morbid joke, a sign that his core essence, his quick, dark intellect, was returning. Anya ignored the dark humor. Less resistance means more rapid discharge. You hit the cable first, Elias. I'll hit it 1 second later, using the recoil to shield us both from the electrical blast. It's the final act of integrated faith. She needed him to act first, to be the initial massive spike of energy that overloaded the line, while she followed with the secondary shielding surge that completed the circuit and protected them from the blowback. It was the same high-risk synchronization they had mastered in the Nexus, but with no safety net. Elias nodded, his face pale with pain and fatigue. He grabbed the severed end of the thick electrical cable. His eyes, for the first time since the gore-field, showed a flicker of his old self, the ruthless strategist, now applying his skills to save her. For the center Anya, he whispered, a final selfless thought dedicated to her cause. For the freedom Elias, she countered, dedicated to his life. With a guttural cry, Elias slammed the exposed wire against the main power strip on the floor. The initial result was horrifying. A massive blue electrical bolt erupted from the contact point, surging directly into Elias. He convulsed violently, his body taking the full brunt of the recirculated Nexus energy. The chandeliers above flickered madly, and the consortium's voice shrieked in agony as their power source wavered. Anya didn't hesitate. Counting the millisecond, she threw herself onto the cable, wrapping her arms around Elias's already seizing body. Her own body absorbed the secondary surge, completing the circuit. The collective psychic and electrical energy, the raw, paradoxical power of their integrated survival, slammed into the ballroom's grid. The effect was instantaneous and absolute. The shimmering containment dome shattered. The massive crystal chandelier exploded, spraying fragments of glass across the room. The 200 approaching attendees froze once more, their eyes returning to a blank, lifeless stare. The high-pitched whine died, replaced by a profound, blessed silence. The consortium of synthesis was cut off, their local node annihilated. Anya immediately pulled Elias away from the smoking cable. The floor around them was scorched, and the air smelled sharply of ozone and burnt hair. Elias was breathing shallowly, but alive. The stillness of the ballroom was shattered as the temporal field that had frozen the crowd finally dissipated. The waiter who was mid-pour gasped, dropping the champagne flute. The society columnist shrieked, finally closing her jaw. Chaos erupted, not from fear of the field, but from the sudden, inexplicable appearance of two figures, covered in grime and blood, rising from the smoke of the exploded clock. Anya looked down at Elias. His face was gray, but his pulse was thready but strong. She knew they were safe from the field, but not from the real world. They had just committed sabotage, assault, and caused mass hysteria in a high-profile DC gala. The police, the media, and worst of all, the deep, shadowy pockets of the consortium, would be mobilized in minutes. We escaped the field, Thorne, she whispered, pulling his arm over her shoulder and hauling him toward the back exit. Now we run the greatest maze of all. The chaos that erupted in the DC ballroom was the perfect cover. Amidst the screaming, the flashing police lights, and the utter confusion caused by the smoking hole in the floor and the electrocuted power strip, Anya Mbeki managed to drag Elias Thorne's barely conscious body through a service hallway and out a delivery entrance. They were fugitives, but they were free. Anya didn't head for a hospital. Her architectural mind, honed by the Nexus, knew that true safety lay in invisibility and system disruption. The consortium of synthesis was vast and powerful. A hospital would be the first place they would look to reclaim their asset. She commandeered a beat-up maintenance van, a move the old Anya would never have considered, but the new Anya knew survival demanded breaking small rules, and drove them to the only safe, hidden place she knew, the basement of the community center she had fought so desperately to save from Elias Thorne. Elias spent the next 48 hours hovering on the brink, recovering from the sheer physical and energetic trauma of the final surge. Anya, a brilliant architect, found herself functioning as a nurse, using her knowledge of structural integrity to monitor his failing biological systems. He was weak, his power meter reading permanently depleted, but the life force, the integrated spirit they had forged, was intact. When Elias finally woke, the first thing he saw was the chipped paint of the basement ceiling and the fiercely determined face of Anya Mbeki, her own exhaustion evident but her guard still up. "Anya," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "The Nexus. The power. Did we escape before it hit zero?" "We hit absolute zero, Thorne," she replied, a faint, weary smile touching her lips. "But we proved that absolute trust generates energy where logic predicts nothing. We broke the logic of consumption. The consortium's local node is fried." Elias took a deep breath. His mind, freed from the lifelong prison of entitlement and self-interest, was clearer than it had ever been. The consortium won't quit. They'll try to rebuild the Nexus, or find another way to harness the emotional currency. They will come for us, Anya. They know we are the integrated key. Anya nodded. "Which is why we're going to beat them at their own game. I used the system override to reverse the flow, but the core design remains mine. I know the flaw. The flaw isn't just the zero-sum logic. The flaw is that the system requires the designer's input to reach its next level of efficiency." They realized their true victory lay not in running, but in redefining reality, just as they had redefined growth and sacrifice in the Nexus. Elias, stripped of his fortune, which the consortium had likely seized anyway, along with all his assets, had one remaining immense asset: his absolute, unparalleled understanding of global finance, corporate structures, and shell organizations. Anya, the architect, and Elias, the apprentice strategist, began to build their counterattack from the basement of the community center. The consortium is a series of shell corporations, funneled through dark money trusts, Elias explained, tracing lines on a dirty whiteboard, a far cry from his previous mahogany desk. "My old life was built on creating and exploiting those funnels. Now, I'll use that knowledge to dismantle them. We hit their true nexus, their financial one." Anya provided the structural plan. She located the blueprints for her original integrated psychological resilience facility, the simulation that became the field, and began to disseminate them across the dark web. Not the weaponized versions, but the original, theoretical plans showing the system override and the paradoxical integration as the core mechanism. "They rely on secrecy and confusion," Anya stated. "We expose the idea of the nexus. We prove that emotional manipulation is now a quantifiable power source for shadowy groups. If the world believes the concept of the field is real, the consortium's power, built on quiet exploitation, decays." Over the next few months, their partnership achieved what neither could have done alone. Anya built the narrative structure, a global warning about the weaponization of human psychology, giving detailed, impossible-to-refute structural information about the field. Elias, fully recovered and fueled by the redemption he had earned, became the financial ghost. He leveraged his residual knowledge and old contacts, people who owed him favors, people who feared him, and people who had also been used by the consortium, to track the flow of money. He didn't just expose the consortium, he paralyzed them. He initiated simultaneous, cascading financial audits and legal inquiries against their core shell corporations, overloading their system with the one burden they couldn't afford: accountability. The impact was devastating. The consortium's assets were frozen. Their operational funding, the dark money meant to expand the Nexus project, was cut off. They vanished back into the shadows, their ability to create new large-scale psychological traps nullified by a torrent of real-world legal and financial decay. They had been defeated by a paradoxical mix of a former billionaire's intellect and an architect's moral fortitude. The victory was quiet, achieved not with a bang, but with a series of coordinated systemic collapses. Elias Thorne was legally ruined, his name forever associated with the disastrous gala, but his redemption was complete. He had lost his shield of wealth, but gained a life of genuine purpose. The most tangible sign of their success, however, was in Anya's world. With the consortium's financial grip broken, and Elias's old firm, the developer that had sought the demolition, now focused on survival, the community center was safe. Not only that, but Elias, working pro bono, used his remaining network connections to secure massive, legitimate funding for the center's expansion, transforming it into a hub for ethical technology and resilience studies, a positive antithesis to the Nexus he helped defeat. Elias never returned to the yacht or the bespoke suits. He moved into a small, functional apartment near the center, fully dedicating his analytical brilliance to dismantling systemic injustice. He was, finally, truly Elias. Anya Mbeki, standing on the newly laid foundation of the expanded center, watched Elias direct a team of construction workers. She no longer saw the silk tie-wearing metaphor for greed. She saw the man who had willingly sacrificed himself for her. They had saved the center, they had saved the world from the Nexus, and in doing so they had saved each other. Their future was not a romantic fairy tale. It was a partnership, a high-stakes, integrated collaboration built on absolute trust. They had discovered that the most valuable power was not external currency, but the internal, integrated strength of two people committed to the same selfless goal. Anya walked over to Elias, placing her hand on his shoulder, a touch that was now a gesture of equal strength and respect, a solid reflection of the key of connection they had forged under the Thorns. The structural integrity of this new world is holding, Thorne, she observed. High liquidity, zero debt, and a strong revenue stream of moral purpose, architect, Elias replied, a genuine smile replacing the old sneer. They had escaped the field before the power hit zero. More than that, they had escaped their old selves, proving that the true nexus of reality was the unbreakable bond forged in the crucible of absolute sacrifice. If you enjoyed the intense journey of Elias and Anya, the high stakes of the gore-field, the intellectual puzzles of the Nexus, and their ultimate hard-won redemption, then please show your support. Thumbs up like this story to let me know you connected with the architects of reality. Bell subscribe for notifications so you don't miss the next epic tale. I'll be creating a new world with a larger cast and even more complex challenges soon. Thank you for reading, and I'll see you in the next story.